Welcome to another edition of Mystic Detective Podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. And we're here again today with our special guest, Nancy Simpson, who will introduce herself in just a moment. And I am a host, Andrea Marziano,
And I am the other host. One might call me a co-host, Crystal Miller.
And I am Nancy Simpson, the guest on today's show.
Excellent. Great to have you, Nancy. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about before we really delve into our topic, have either of you been listening to any kind of podcast that's kind of shaken your world, or just something you've gotten attached to recently?
I've been listening to it for a couple of years, actually, but it just came out with a new season, and that's True Crime Bullshit, and it's all about why do I always forget his name? Israel Keys. And he's a serial killer that was just brutal, and he hid kill kits all over the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would go travel to somewhere and dig up a kill kit 5 years later, kill somebody with it, take them over state lines so that they wouldn't be found where they were killed. And he was just brutal. Man. His very last crime was, I don't know if you're squeamish, Nancy.
No.
But his very last crime was that he kidnapped a girl from a coffee, the stand-up things. I can't think of what they're called at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Shed, sort of.
Yeah.
And raped her, killed her, put her in a freezer, went on a cruise with his girlfriend and his daughter for 8 days, I think it was. Came back, sewed her eyeballs open, took a picture of her with a newspaper with that day's date, and sent a ransom note to her father. She was 12 days dead. Yeah. So this guy there was a lot of police interviewing him, and he was coy and he's awful. Ugh, so awful. But he killed himself, so we'll never know like how many people he killed but yeah, so I'm obsessed with that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
And I've heard that story in other podcasts because Nancy, Crystal, and I are kind of murderinos, and we listen to that sort of thing all the time. One of the podcasts that I really, really enjoy is based on medical stuff, and it's called This Podcast Will Kill You. And it's not a podcast about murder or anything like that, but it's all the ways that we can it talks about bacteria, it talks about illnesses, it talks about just all those sort of oddities and what can affect us. And most of the time, the people don't actually die, they just become sick and then get treated. But it's really interesting to me because I'm also a nurse. And so to bring that medical stuff into what I'm listening is sometimes a nice break from murder.
I watch a lot of this lady named, but it's mostly on TikTok. And her name is Barbara O'Neill, and she's a medical person, and things that you can find out about, how to treat yourself healthier.
Oh, that's fine.
All the bugs you can get and the parasites it's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I feel like some of those either make us hysterical or somehow comforted to know that while there's a lot out there, we usually don't have to deal with most of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. And I've got a couple of grandchildren that love to watch the murder mystery shows, based on true stories.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Well, to move on to our topic, Nancy, what do you find as your mystic ability, or what would you like to, what kind of gifts would you like to share with us today?
I believe I'm very empathic. I've been called a medium. I don't like calling myself that, but it's kind of the in-between. I learned Reiki. So when I do Reiki on people, you kind of go into a theta state, and in that theta state, you can ask, and I call my guides and guardians and stuff just my peeps, right? My peeps with me. And so you can ask them, like when you're doing Reiki, you're hovering over the chakras, and you're asking them if they need to be turned up, turned down, just balanced. What are the problems in those areas? And it's wonderful because you can use kinetics. So you use your body as a yes and a no, because all you have to do is ask your spirit guides and guardians, show me yes. You put your hands out and you believe firmly, and you have to state the question like it's not a question, like it is a fact, right? So you ask, does this chakra is the correct way to pronounce it, need to be turned up? And then you wait, because you can't ask like 3 or 4 questions in a row, you know. So you ask turned up and you wait for your body. And then if it says yes, then you turn it up. If it needs to be turned down, you turn it down. And I believe everybody on this planet is born with gifts. And then we as parents, not realizing what we're doing, we knock it out of our children. You know, we pound that beautiful square peg into that round hole. And then as you grow up, you have to unlearn everything you thought was real and then tap into your true self and your higher self. And there's a lot of classes, things that you can take out there that will guide you into heightening whatever gift you were born with. And I've been having a little bit of fun doing remote viewing. And so that's when somebody calls you and they tell you that they've lost something. And you just really have to tap into, you usually need the area that they lost it, what they lost, the name of what they lost, if it was a dog or a cat or, you know, whatever. And so far that's been really successful. I've helped somebody find dog tags, and then the dog, and then a goat, and the goat was dead, but you know, because she had lost it the night before, and it was just a little baby infant, like 2 days old, 1 day old, and the mother had abandoned it. And the lady thought that it would be okay because it's a wild animal to leave it out in the barn-ish area overnight. And she called the next morning in a panic and wondered where her little baby goat was. And so you just go into this, like I said, like a theta, and then you start trying to remote view where it was at. And I could see that it had coiled itself up in the corner of the shed that was on their property. So I texted her back and asked her, do you have a shed? And she said, yes. And so I told her, go into the furthest left-hand corner on the bottom and you will find it. I thought it was still alive. And I said, you'll find it. It's coiled up right there. And she texted me back later and thanked me and said they did find it, but they ended up having to bury it because it was just too young to be left overnight. And I think everybody can do it. You just have to find the right classes, the right people that will guide you through these things, you know?
Yeah. So a question, when you say you saw it coiled up, did you really see it as a baby goat and you knew exactly what it was, or was it sort of an image or impression?
I see it in my mind's eye. So it's not like with your eyeballs, you know, but
Right.
it was definitely a picture of a baby goat in my mind's eye, just, you know, like in that infantile where they curl up, you know?
Yeah, like the fetal position, sort of.
Yes, I was gonna say there's a word for it.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting because we've talked to a couple of other guests, and our podcast listeners may experience these things differently. And we're finding that, you know, as I think probably we all know as having mystic gifts, that each one of us looks at things a little bit differently, or it manifests in different ways. So I'm
Yes,
always interested to see how someone who has a gift that's different from what I have,
yes.
how it comes up for them. Now, one of our guests recently has said that she can touch something and get a visual of various kinds from the object itself. Do you
Right.
experience anything like that?
No, I've never done that yet. And I don't get names because I've got friends that actually get names of people. And so I don't get names. I can usually tell if there's energy in the room. We do take a lot of pictures, like at my house. My husband passed about 5 years ago. And my daughter says, I know it was him in the room. And there's this huge orb in the picture. And she says that she could see it visually with her eyes. And this happens at my house all the time. And so she hurried and grabbed her camera. And just as she held her camera up and took the picture, you could see the orb just flies right out of the picture, but you can see the whole thing, you know?
Wow.
And so we always just keep our senses open to see if loved ones are stopping by. And you can definitely keep that communication with your loved ones just by meditating, just by tapping in. Learn theta, learn Reiki if you can. It teaches you to tap in and really be able to carry on conversations still. I don't go to any graveyard. If I want a cup of coffee with my mom, I get coffee, and you know, we sit at the table and we have coffee. That, she's not there physically, but boy, I can hear her conversation. I know what she would reply to my questions,
Mhm.
And so it's a beautiful way to get through grief because you never get over it. There's no getting over grief because the grief ball stays the same. Your vessel grows around it. So it's a beautiful thing.
Reiki's been a running theme for our guests, it seems.
Hmm.
It's great practice. Really
I
good
love it. Yes.
Yeah, really good for tuning in.
That's what
Mhm.
I was thinking. I was thinking Reiki is our gateway to our mystic powers
Yeah.
in a lot of
Yes.
places.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've always said if you want a good beginning, start there because it teaches you about energy and how
Mhm.
to manipulate energy, but then receive the energy. And a lot of people just are not taught how to receive that energy. And once you learn it, I mean, you start tapping in all the time. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Have you done any other kinds of formal trainings, or has Reiki been, as we talked about, sort of your start?
Yes, I've done Reiki. I learned Theta. And then for the last 2 years, I've been walking the Hopi Native American path. And
Oh,
so
and what?
it's learning shamanism.
Right. And so, are you in a shamanic class, or are you doing a self exploration?
I'm in a class.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's awesome.
My major teacher just moved away. And so she has hooked me up with these other two. And I know it's the right thing to do because when I say to listen to those little, you know, nudges, I had a dream one night that I was a little firefly and I was on the back of a bird and this feather come down and covered me over. And then I heard this voice say, "Don't worry, Moonchild, Raven has you." And I thought, I woke up and I thought, Raven, my granddaughter? Because my granddaughter's name is Raven, right? And I thought, is it her? No. Well, a few weeks later, when I found out that my teacher was moving, she introduced me to this couple, and their names are Betty and Scott. And she says, and I don't know if I told you, they both carry Raven medicine.
Wow.
So I thought, boom. So they're the ones that are going to carry on my teachings.
Wow.
Wow.
So, and that was my confirmation. That's all I needed was to hear that that's the medicine they held. And so it's interesting. And I try to dive into everything because even when I do Reiki, I don't just do Reiki. I do a combination of Nick Ortner tapping. So I don't know if you've heard of the tapping, but then you can also, I add in a little bit of Donna Eden energy medicine. And so, you know how we always live in fight, flight, or freeze. You live in a city, that's where you're at,
Mhm.
And so a beautiful, my best girlfriend is taking Donna Eden energy medicine. And so she said to back flush that, all you have to do is go from their eyebrow to the edge of their eye to their ear, back over, around and down and off the ring finger and throw it. And so you do this with the energy and you do it 3 times as I'm doing the Reiki. And then when I get to the other side, I do the other side as well. And you cannot believe how many clients will leave saying, boy, I was so frustrated and just ahead of myself when I got here. And now I'm just so relaxed.
Right. That's awesome. Could you
Yeah.
explain what back flush means? I've never heard of that.
We all have meridians, right? That
Mhm.
run the length of our body. And the Asian community have known about this for years. That's how they use acupuncture and acupressure. So these meridians flow in a certain direction. And so that's what you have to do to get your body up and flowing and working the way it's supposed to. Well, when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, obviously it's not running the way it's supposed to. Now it's overactive. So instead of running the meridian upwards, when you do your daily energy routine, you run it backwards.
Hmm.
And so you're running it against its natural flow.
Hmm.
And so when you
That-
do that, it just makes a world of difference.
Well, I'm going to add that to my practice.
Yes. Yeah, it's
I like that.
wonderful.
I've never heard of that, but it makes sense, especially the way I look at it. When you started saying that, the feeling I was getting is that we are all so overloaded with everything that this will bring us maybe even back to baseline, and then we can start doing the healing.
Yes. And then I will always give my Reiki clients homework to do. So, because anybody that has gifts, you can pick up on what's going on with each chakra.
Mhm.
And each chakra governs and protects and runs certain organs. And so we don't call it disease, we call it dis-ease, right? So you have dis-ease about something, and Reiki makes you go in deep and find out what that something is. What are you hiding from yourself sometimes even? And once you bring it to the surface, and then you can look at it with an analytical brain, and a critical thinking mind, you can unravel what you've been taught. And I always ask people, you've got to go in and find out where you learned it, who you learned it from, and do you still believe in the behavior? And if not, then you have to undo that. If you don't believe in the behavior, would you take advice from the person you learned it from, even if it's your parents? And sometimes that's nope, not at this age, And so you just keep winding it back until you find out where did they learn it from. And when you realize we've been taught a whole lot of bogus stuff that we hang on to as real, we've got to deconstruct a lot of things that we've been taught to move forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And
Yes.
it probably goes, all the way back to the Salem witch trials, and then goes back further and goes back further.
Yes.
And, it's just all of this that has been fed to us generationally for so long that it's really, it's sometimes a tough nut to crack.
Yes. Yeah. It's
So.
really hard. And like I says, especially when you realize that a lot of things that we learned were from our parents. And I had a very wonderful upbringing. My dad was way ahead of his time, because he always used to tell us, as he had 5 daughters, he had no choice but to tell us, you got to learn this stuff yourself, because I don't want you stuck on the side of a road, like changing a tire or changing your oil. He said, I don't want you stuck on the side of the road and waiting for, God knows who to stop and help and expect God knows what. So he thought you will be in control and in charge of your own self, so he was way ahead of his time.
Oh, wow.
In fact, his mother was a quarter Cherokee. I'm 16th. And it was her grandmother used to read tea leaves, and she was a medicine woman, and so she did all of this stuff for her tribal people before my great grandfather married her.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So it's wonderful stuff. And it's not witchy, it's labeled witch or evil and all it is it's different. These people say pray, we say send energy. Say angels, we say ascended masters. So everybody's saying the same thing, but they're arguing over who's the rightest, most correct person, in all of it. And
I preferred the rightest. I like that better.
we're the rightest person on the planet. And if
That's
everybody
right.
would just realize that we all just come from the same source, the same, and we go back to the same,
Right.
It would be marvelous once everybody. Then my dad would always say, and then we'd be in heaven, wouldn't we? So until it gets to that point.
Well, it sounds like you've had experiences with gifts throughout your life, whether you had embraced it yet or not. Was there a moment in time that you decided you were going to start living these gifts, or has it been more progressive than that?
I knew that I had gifts when I was just little. And what's funny is the Native American path that I'm on is like the clan of the buffalo, right? Bison. I love buffalo. And when I was a child, there was a shadow of a buffalo on the wall every night that soothed me to sleep. So even then I knew something was up. And then when I was about 5 or 6, and my little sister, she was a year younger than me, we both saw Ganesh. And I was hitting her and I said, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And she says, yes, I am. And then each one of us at one point or another, all 5 daughters of my parents, ended up seeing a child that they lost first before they had the 5 of us.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is what's weird, is that we never thought to talk about it amongst ourselves when we were children. So somewhere in our psyche, we were told, if you see ghosty stuff. And so it wasn't until we got older and really started getting into this stuff that we realized we had all seen him at one point or another.
Wow.
So keep your mind and your eyes open, because, they'll show themselves to you if you're open and not afraid,
Yeah, for sure.
I always say, if you are afraid, because I teach Reiki as well, and I'll tell my students, now you're going to start feeling things, you're going to start seeing things. I says, and just feel in your body. Does it make you go? Because every time you see something, it'll make you go, kind of go, right? You know,
Mhm.
but then you feel, okay, is it in your gut, like run? Or is it just in your heart space, like, ooh, what can I ask this thing? Right? What kind of questions? Who are you? Why are you here? And I said, but if you get it in the gut, like you've been punched and you want to run, I said, don't run. Whatever you do, don't run. Because the negative feeds off of fear.
Mhm.
So the more afraid you are and the more screamy and the more running out, they got you. You know, they got a hold of you. So
Mhm.
I would rather just, you know, even though your heart's clear up in here, you know, there's times that you have to just say, okay, not tonight, get out of my house, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you teach them some tools then to release that sort of fear and energy?
Yes, because there was one night I had this kid and his wife living with us to help them out a little bit, and I've got a house full. I tell everybody my house is a zoo because it's got so many people and animals. But this kid and his wife moved in because we thought we could help them for a year until they moved out. And everybody else in the house was gone that night except for the three of us. They were all the way in the basement. I was in my bedroom at the top floor. And I was just kind of laying there getting ready to go to sleep. And all of a sudden, my bedroom door, you know how it just
Uh-huh.
and rattled. And of course, that makes you go, whoa, what the crap?
Yeah.
And I knew it was only the three of us home. So I got my cell phone, I called downstairs, and I had him. Now, he's as chicken as I was. It's like, is there anybody else in the house? So he sends his wife up to look up
jeez.
the hall and to check all the doors and windows. She gets back downstairs and said, no, nobody is here but us. Well, after she got back downstairs, my knob was still going doink, 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 doink. And so once I realized that's what it really is, it's not another human, I just sat up in my bed and said, not tonight. You are not welcome here. Get out. And it stops. You know, but
That's
we have
awesome.
that fear in us to where if you go like that and you're starting to pull the sheets up over your eyes, it can get worse. It can get more powerful because it's
Yeah.
feeding off of your fear. You
I've
know,
been listening. There's another podcast I just remembered I've been listening to, and it's by Roz Hernandez,
Mhm.
and she does a podcast where it's called Ghosted, and she is a drag queen, and she interviews all kinds of different people about their ghostly experiences. And one of the things they say on their show, she says, is that I want to see ghosts and I want to see them in a nice, happy kind of way, but
Mhm.
my bedroom is my bedroom. You
Yes.
don't get to come in.
Yep.
And so Roz has talked about that as a perspective from Roz, as well
Mhm.
as some of the guests. And so I find it really interesting to see what kind of tools people use to release the negativity. When I've worked with people who have had dark experiences, I remind them that it is a matter of light and dark, and they get to
Yes.
choose.
Yes.
And they get to choose who they let into their space.
Mhm.
And I had one person that came to me to assist her with really growing her gifts. And she had stopped as a child because she had had some very dark and heavy experiences. And many times she had felt like she had been held down on her bed with a very, very dark energy.
Mhm.
And she had some different kind of terms initially when she started talking about it. And I assisted her to sort of shift how she looked at it so it could take some of that fear away.
Yes.
And then she was able to feel like she could have her gifts and have only light. And that was huge for her, because then she's gone on to do a lot of really cool things with the gifts she's got.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's super important for people to be able to identify how to step out of a fear space.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that when you talk about it and you talk about giving people ideas and tools to be able to step out of fear, that's really huge.
Mhm.
Now, I'd love to hear, if you're comfortable with it, about some of those experiences you might have had as a child that maybe did that give you a pause and not make you not want to open those gifts, or?
Yes. Like a fool when I was about I was 12. And my older sister, she was already married and had one child. And so she wanted to come over to her house to play with the Ouija board.
Mhm.
Yeah. And a lot of people think it's just a toy. It is not a toy. It's not a toy. And so we're playing with the Ouija board, and my sister was older. So like I says, I was only about 12 and she was 18, 17, right around there. And so we start asking questions to the board, of course. And at one point she says, let's see if it'll touch us, you know, stop. So yeah, it starts touching me and my other, that ended up being my sister-in-law, right? But we were just two friends hanging out at the time. And it touched her first, my sister-in-law, Stella. And it kind of went like this on her, like, if you can see it, my fingers, you know, and up her arm. And I thought, and she jumped and we're going, what happened? So she tells us, and in between everything that happened, we'd stop for a minute and then my sister would talk us back into starting again, right? So then it was my turn and I got touched up the leg, up the thigh, like that. And finally she says, I want you to touch me. And it kept spelling out, no, nope. And she says, why not? And it said, because you're married. So right then I thought, what did I just sign myself up to? What do you mean? Because she's married, right? And she got really mad. She's kind of got a Ursula personality at times. And she says, damn it, I said, touch me. So right then she grabs her head and we turn the lights back on and look, and there was like a pinprick in her head where something had, like, you know, it was frightening. And so I kept saying, I don't want to play anymore. Don't want to play. And she says, well, at least let's ask who's the favorite. And I'm thinking, no, because I already know. I just knew. And the planchette thingy came right off the board as we were asking and pointed into my rib cage. And I was done at that time. I told her I didn't want to do anymore. I didn't want to play. And she says, well, at least let's ask why. And so we sit back down and we ask why. And it spells out, because you have a picture of me on your underwear. And my eyes got huge because I knew what underwear it was talking about. I had these cute little powder blue bikini underwear that had a red elastic, and in red, right in the crotch area, well, the pubic area, was a picture of the devil that said, baby, light my fire. And I knew that was the pair he was talking about. And I looked at my sister and I said, I don't think I put those on today. Those aren't the ones I have on. And by this time we are scared out of our wits. So we all hunker in and we're arm in arm. We're going to the bathroom because we all got to go to the bathroom now anyway. And I pulled my pants down and they were the underwear I had on.
Wow.
And so we finally stopped it. And after that, there were so many weird things that started happening in our lives. My sister, we didn't go over there a lot because we were younger. We were still going to school. We were doing all this other stuff. And in fact, I was in the 7th grade. And so we would be walking in the neighborhood and all of a sudden we would hear these chains, me and my sister-in-law. She wasn't that then, me and my friend. And she'd look at me and I'd look at her and say, did you hear that? And she'd say, yeah. Well, right after we would hear the chains, something would happen. Like a car veered off the road, almost hit us. One time a car, after we heard the chains, a car come pulling up into the church parking lot because we were just sitting there. It was after 10 o'clock. We should have been in the backyard, but my backyard was on the church parking lot, right? So we were sitting there. We knew we shouldn't have been. And this car pulls up, and a typical guy that you would think is how they draw the devil, you know, a pointy beard with the mustache, and he pulls up. He had a top hat on and a cloak. I mean, come on. And he gets out of his car and he says, do your parents know that you're back here? And it's like, we're going, oh. So we just jumped. We jumped the fence. A few days after that, we're walking and we hear the chain again. And we're looking around ourselves thinking, we know something's going to happen. And nothing was there. Well, we hear it again. We turn around and there's this guy on a bike, same thing, pointed beard with weird little mustache. And as he went past us, he waved at us like how we got touched. Doing that weird. And he waved and had this weird grin on his face. And we just started running. And then when we ran, and we were running as fast as we could, we turned back and looked, and there was nobody there. But yet we had both seen him.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, weird
Wow.
freaky things like that started happening. So I backed away from it because it has always pulled me. So I backed away from kind of the darker stuff, but then I kept practicing the stuff that helps your intuition. And that's like you think of the square, triangle, rectangle, wavy lines, and then you practice that with your kids, grandkids, friends, or think of colors and try to think the color to another person. So we would write out what we were going to do and give it to a third person. And then the thinker would be, the sender would be sending to the receiver in the order that you write it down. And you can't believe how good you can get over time of the shapes and the colors, and it will start really boosting that part of your energy.
That's really interesting. I'd love to step back just for a second about the story you were saying about when you heard the chains.
Ooh, yes.
And you had talked earlier about how if it feels scary, don't run because you're bringing that negativity. Do you feel like when you and your friend, and as children, I can see this completely doing this, but do you feel like if you and your friend had said something like, not today, you could have stopped it? Or do you think that
Yes.
was a done deal?
No, I would have been able, had I known the power each one of us carry, I could have stopped it before it escalated in as bad as it just kept getting. I mean, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. I mean,
Wow.
we were being held down in bed, and there was one night when do you know if somebody's hopping up on a block wall, the sound of their feet hitting the wall? I heard that, and I look up to my window, and the moon was shining through my window, but there was a silhouette of a guy. And there's no way. I mean, it had been a super strength because my mom's windows were the more shallow ones that are farther off the ground, but yet he was holding himself up on that windowsill. And then I had my head under the covers, and I finally pulled him down like this to see, can he see me? And as I thought, can he see me? The sound of his head hitting the window, boom, did that. And it's like, yes, he can see me.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the more fear and the more scared I was, the greater things kept happening. And we were on our way home from junior high one day, and there was this lady, love her to pieces, don't know her name to this day. She was sitting on her porch, and she had a fenced in yard, so we were clear at the sidewalk. And she hollered at both of us, and she says, "It looks like a couple of gals have some spiritual problems going on, huh?" And we just stopped dead. It's like, how do you know that? What do we do? How do we get out of this? And so we went up to her, and she was more on the religious rather than spiritual side. Both work. I don't care. Both work. And so she says, you go home, and every time something happens, you start saying, by the power of the Elohim, by the power of Jesus Christ, and by the power of myself, I command you out of my room. And so she did that over and over. And so we started doing it, and pretty soon it all stopped. It all just went away. And that's when I started finding my power. So about 13, 14, it's like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. And that's why I don't run anymore. But boy, for some reason, sheets sure save you,
Sheets.
They do.
Sheets are so powerful. If I hide from it, it can't possibly be there.
Mhm.
That's amazing. Wow. I've heard some stories of people who have had dark experiences like that. And I'm so happy for you that you found someone who could help you release that,
Mhm.
because I can only imagine how heavy that would have felt for you through your life if you hadn't been able to start shifting it, or some people call transmuting that dark
Yes.
energy.
Yeah.
And wow, that's amazing.
Mhm.
Huh.
Well, and I really think that dark energy attached itself because I felt guilty my whole life. Because my sister's oldest son, right? He was born, he was in the house when we were playing with the Ouija board. And that poor kid has had a troubled life. He started having nightmares after that, thinking that flies were eating his little sister's face off. I mean, he was just having these horrible nightmares. And I think a residual part of it stayed in that house, and didn't know any better at the time. Now I smudge houses.
That's what I was going to say is all of us would be good. Okay, ding,
Yes.
ding, smudge, all of the things. Yeah. Wow. Wow. And so that's interesting because one of the things you had said earlier is that you feel like we kind of beat this out of our children, not literally, of course, but just smush it down. And we were interviewing my daughter actually. And I asked her whether she thought this was generational, like, do we have gifts from generation to generation? And you
Mhm.
partially answered that earlier with your grandmother or great grandmother.
Mhm.
But what I'm wondering is if we have these and we've known about it, and say in your family, it was there generationally, I wonder why, with those kind of gifts, people still maybe hold back. Um, what do you ladies think about that? Do you have any feelings about why even someone who knows about these gifts might hold back?
Religion.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
Religion.
If I were to, just as a side note, I don't have any childhood memories. I don't have any, I mean, I have childhood memories. I don't have any childhood memories of having any gifts or anything. I had a pretty traumatic childhood. I know that if I had shown any of those kinds of gifts, that my mother would have either tried to label them as religion and
Mhm.
attributed them to something that I now believe they're not attributable to, or she would have said, you know, that, and I think it's more likely, sorry, Maureen, but I think it's more likely that she would say that's, you know, that's Satan, don't
Yes.
let it in.
Yes. Yes.
And
They're
so,
they're handing out pamphlets at some of the churches that if you hear the word energy work or Reiki, that is coming straight from the devil and do not buy into it.
jeez.
And you're going, and I know this because I have a friend that's still very deep into the religion.
Mm-hmm.
They bring it up and they say it's demonic and don't you? Well, if you're always taught that that's demonic and you don't even realize that that was a gift that they gave us to come here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. Actually, I'm going to revise what I said only because her oldest sister had gifts and she accepted, I mean, she did accept those gifts as gifts from God that were holy gifts. So I'm only slightly revising my statement, but I think had her sister not had the gifts, then, you know, then she would have never, ever been open to it. But
Right.
if you know this particular sister, she's just, like you can't not like her, you can't not trust her. She's just like absolutely practically perfect in every way.
Beautiful.
And so yeah, so I would actually, sorry, I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. I'm having a few realizations here.
Yeah.
I would actually attribute my openness to try. I also took Reiki classes, and that's kind of where I found particularly my psychic gift.
Mhm.
But I would actually attribute that to my aunt Annetta because she did a lot of energy work on me, a lot of rapid eye, a lot of just energy work, you know, that sort of thing. And so now that I think about it, I think that she's what made it safe for me to even consider it, to even, you know, dip my toe.
Yeah. Beautiful.
You know, your sisters, do you feel like the sisters that embrace these sorts of gifts feel the same way? Maybe they got it from there, or do you
Mhm.
think it's a connection for them too, Crystal?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I would say that the only one I'm going to name is Holly. I would say that Holly probably not. I think Holly considers hers less spiritual and more or less well, not energy. I don't even know. I'm not going to speak for Holly. I would say that Holly feels like she studied it and learned it and opened it that way. My other sister could go either way. I'm really not sure.
Well, and I wonder too, Crystal and I have known each other for a long time, and it kind of came to me that some of the behaviors that I've seen, at least with the siblings, is that sometimes I feel like they've embraced the gifts sort of to spite the family. And
Mhm.
I may be incorrect on that, but I wonder if a person opens a gift that way with sort of I don't know if darkness is the right way to say it, but an ulterior motive maybe. I wonder how that can manifest. And I may be totally off track with that, but I have seen other people that might have done something like that, sort of as a rebellion.
Mhm.
Um, do y'all have any feeling about that? It just sort of, like you were saying, it sort of came to me that I wonder if they start on a path of rebellion and just say, well, I'm going to prove everything you think is wrong by doing this.
Mhm.
Does that
Mhm.
even make sense?
Yes, because
Yeah.
some people are the black sheep of the family. And they're always, it's like, that's the wackadoodle one. They don't know what they're talking about. And they said, this is bunk. And, and then the family finds out years later, oh, that is the better way, And so sometimes it's the black sheep that will lead the rest of the family out if they're open enough. Because my youngest sister was just blown wide open when she was born. She was just tapped in. But then she could not squelch the voices. And there was too many people, and especially you get around your peers and school and all of this other, and you're looked at as that you're wackadoodle, and
Mhm.
so she
You're
started.
Luna Lovegood, even though I
Yeah,
hate J.K.
yeah,
Rowling, you're Luna Lovegood. Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
And so then people will pull their energies away from you. They think that you're crazy. They don't want anything to do with you. So you learn to keep your mouth shut.
Mhm.
When you watch what the sister goes through, it's like, I'm not going to tell anybody that I know what I'm doing. And then I did readings kind of for years because I did nails for 45 years. And so
Wow.
I had so many clients say, I'd be dead if it wasn't for you. And
Wow.
and when I finally went to my Reiki teacher, she was saying, well, you should have been doing this for years. You're really tapped in. And I said, well, I have been. I said, but I just don't charge for readings. I charge for a set of nails.
Right.
So it was always a way to hand them some good information and help them without saying, guess what, I've got this. You know what I mean? And it made it
Yeah.
to where I felt like I was more approachable by the people.
Right. I get that. I have a question that just came up for me the other day. I was speaking with my mother, and we were talking about this podcast, and she gets that I have gifts, and has some level of trepidation, not trepidation, but just doubt maybe about what it can look like. And when we were talking, we talked about some things that had happened in my childhood with myself and my sister and that sort of thing. And mom said that she sometimes will have visions. And I was shocked because I had no idea. But what she said she often sees is me, that she'll wake up and she'll think that she sees me in the room and has a question for me or says something or is hearing something. And I really thought that was interesting because I've always thought that this would be something from someone who has passed on. And in my estimation, I have not. But we don't know for sure. But
Yeah.
I was wondering, I'm wondering if that's one of the alternative universe sort of things or what. Nancy, do you have an idea? I see you shaking your head or nodding.
Yes, because we're
Mhm.
all connected.
Mhm.
And depending on who you listen to, it's like this silver thread that connects every single one of us. And as my mother was passing, I believe it's so much to be true because she kept saying to me, do you see all these little silver spiders? There's silver spiders everywhere. Well, it was her connection falling away.
Mm.
And I told her, I said, I don't see them. She says, oh, now you're going to tell me that I'm hallucinating. And I said, no. I said, I firmly believe you're seeing them. I just can't,
Right.
Wow.
So it connects every one of us. And so my oldest sister told me the other day that I visited her in her dream because she's been going through a whole lot of stuff. And she said, you took me by the chin and just, kind of said something. And it was so profound to her. And it was while we were both sleeping. So I believe very much we can help each other. And it wasn't until my mom started getting older and sicker that we found out we've got this place we used to both work at St. Mark's Hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, where we meet the dead and living is in this wonky, like 10 by 10 elevator on the second floor at St. Mark's.
Wow.
And it's the weirdest thing. And so when I see people there, and then we go into a warehouse that's at St. Mark's too. And so we get on the elevator, we get to the warehouse, and then that's when I can communicate with everybody that's passed in my dream time. And
Okay, I was wondering if this was literal time or in your,
in dream time. And so I told my mom, I said, when you get there, and we found it out in her later years because we started talking about different dreams. And when she told me, well, there's this wonky elevator at St. Mark's, it blew me away. I says, I'm there too. And so I told her after she passed, I says, I want one sentence to come through, and I didn't breathe a word of it to anybody. I wanted it to be from her through a medium to my ears, right? So I didn't breathe a word what I wanted her to say. And then I also told her, I said, I want to someday audibly hear your voice, and I want to see you on the elevator, right? So about a week after she passes, there I am dreaming, there's the elevator, right? And I look at it, and I'm in my mind, I'm going, there it is, there's the elevator. And she was going like this, like 2 thumbs up. She made it. She was grinning, and my grandmother, her mother, was standing behind her. And I just was covered with cold chills. It was like, oh, they're doing so good, So it's wonderful if you start tapping into certain, different things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I found it really interesting because I had never considered it. I mean, I've always thought about the threads, gold and silver, whatever it is a person wants to think of, and maybe looking at that as an an alternate reality sort of thing. But I've never had anyone say that they'd experienced that with me. And so I thought it was really interesting that she brought that up. And I feel like because when we're in a sleep state, we're very open and open to those sorts of feelings and things like that. As a nurse, I had a patient pass away suddenly, actually. We thought she was going to go home that day, and literally she did, but it was different than what we thought it was going to look like.
Right.
And I had just gone in and I was taking care of her that morning, and I had done her exam. Everything was great. I was sitting there at the desk writing my notes, because back in the day I used an actual pen, and I was writing the notes, and the physical therapist came out and said, your lady in room whatever is dead. I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Because she had been very much alive when I saw her just literally 15 minutes before. And he said, no, she's dead. And I went in there, and her hand was still warm. So she had just passed. And I was in shock. And I was in my 20s because I was a very early nurse. And I walked out, and up the hallway was this group of women coming, very statuesque women. There were 4 or 5 of them. Can't remember exactly how many, but they were the daughters of this woman. And each one of them in the night had had a visitation from their mother telling them goodbye. And that I've gone, I'm passing, and things like that. And when I walked into the hall and I saw them coming, I was 99% sure that was the family associated with the woman who passed away. But I had several senior ladies on my shift that day. So I didn't just want to walk up to the wrong people and say that their mother had passed, because that's awkward at best.
Yeah.
But I walked up and I said, are you the family of this woman? And they said, yes. And the one who was in front said, she's died, hasn't she? And I said, how do you know? And they said, one, your face. And the other is, we have all had a visitation from her, and we knew she was gone. And they were very, very happy about it, because their mother had a strong reduction in quality of life. She had a hip fracture, and she was now blind and have very low hearing. And so she couldn't do any of the things that she had wanted to do in her life anymore. And she was finished. And she just said she was finished. And that's what she had told them. That was the basic message to everyone. I'm finished. I've lived a great life. I'm ready to go. And she was in her 90s. So it wasn't a huge surprise age-wise either, but it was a huge surprise to me because she was clinically stable. And to have that happen. And I had not had a visit from her in the night to know she was going, but I hear stories about that. And we have a story in our family like that I won't go into right now for time, but I'm wondering if our podcast listeners have had experiences like that. And if you have, please write in and tell us what it is you've experienced to mysticdetectives@gmail.com. And because I feel like many people have experienced this sort of thing. And I feel like it's partially because of the dying experience, and that person is able to say something. And also partially, many times, like I said, it's been in sleep when people are open. And have you, Nancy, ever in your Reiki classes or things like that, has this sort of thing come up with your students, that maybe you've assisted them to capture these moments or feel okay in these moments?
Yes, because I've been with people when they pass, my husband and my mother, and my grandmother, so, and as bad as we want to hang on to them, we've got to remember, what would you want to feel like if you were the one on the bed? And And you got to remember it's their birthday on the other side. There's going to be a party. There's a hoedown going on, when they get there. And so if you can take your grief out of it for the moment that they're passing to make sure that they have a pleasant time. It sounds weird, but yeah, so that they don't feel that rush of wanting to come back for somebody, especially if they're really sick,
Mhm.
And I had another experience with my mother-in-law. Now her health wasn't doing really good, but she was good enough to last a few years. And all of a sudden I had this dream one night but she was like 25, and my husband's dad died when he was only 9, right? So he was only 34 when he died. And she'd been married to another man for 25 some odd years, but he had passed a long time ago. But all of a sudden she was back to 25 years old. I see my husband's dad, his real dad, smiling at me, and he grabbed her hand and he had this simple grin on his face, like, look who I'm bringing with me. And then it was my mother-in-law. And they just walked off into this beautiful field together. And I'm thinking, what could this mean? So I wake up and I tell my husband, I just had this dream. I don't know what it means. Well, she fell the next day and broke her leg. And it was a 4-month battle from that point until it was just deteriorating, day after day until she finally passed, And so I think every one of us, if we just pay attention, our loved ones will tell us, when it's time, when we should back off, when we need to, put a little effort forth. But yes.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And I know that you talked about you're now taking shaman classes. How do you anticipate building that into your practice or your life generally?
That's a very sacred practice. And so what a lot of things, you don't mostly do it on the person in front of you, like where Reiki, the person's right there with you and you're, and so if somebody's wanting, like to be able to have children, there's certain symbols that you can write down, and you blow smoke in the directions, and you call in the directions, and you do all this beautiful sacred stuff, and then you put them on your altar, and then you make sure that you're asking the right gods, goddesses, top dog, you know what I mean, to make sure that this couple can then be, able to bear children. So there's all these different things, but you usually don't have the person with you when you do that, but you can do things for them.
Wow, that's awesome. So it sounded like we all agreed anyway that taking Reiki was the gateway for us. And as Crystal said, we've heard that from several people that was their first step. So that's where you would recommend, Nancy, for them to
Yes.
start? And then would you suggest most people take theta healing as well? Or is there something else okay.
Yeah, Reiki and theta, you take those two, boy, and it teaches you how to tap in and to be still enough to listen. So those
I think if you're nervous enough, get a Reiki treatment.
Yes.
Don't jump right into the class if you're super nervous, but just get a Reiki treatment from somebody.
Yes.
And let that be your guide, how you feel with that treatment.
I like that idea. And then feel how you feel before and after.
Yeah.
And a good Reiki treatment lasts about 28 days. And so see how you feel within that 28 days. Is it something that's calling to you? Did it make a difference? It's beautiful, beautiful energy.
That's awesome. Wow. Well, Nancy, I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure you've given our listeners a lot to think about.
Yes.
And most areas, if a person even just Google's Reiki practitioners, they could probably find someone. And I found that if a person is just with the names that are there, if they think about them and look at them, they will find someone that can resonate with them. So I feel like that's an important step. And that sounds like a great way to give it a start. So appreciate your time. And again, if anyone has anything to share, go ahead and send it to mysticdetectives@gmail.com. We'd love to hear it. We have other exciting episodes and other new visitors to our podcast. And if you have anything you'd like to share, just let us know. And we invite you to stay curious
and keep exploring.